In our last lecture, we defined environmental security as a three-pronged concept consisting of 1. Preventing or repairing military damage to the environment, 2. Protecting the environment for its inherent moral value and the valuable ecosystem services, like climate regulation, water, and animal species, it provides, and 3. Preventing or responding to environmentally caused conflicts. In this lecture, we will look at how environmental security relates to other security paradigms, most notably the national or state-centric security paradigm and the human security paradigm, and finally, what's known as the Copenhagen School, which consists of scholars concerned with the process of securitization and its implications for the environment. What do I mean by paradigms? In this case, I basically mean a set of assumptions about both the ends and means of making something secure, who or what is to be secured, and what instruments will be tasked with achieving it. Our definition of environmental security does tell us who or what is to be secured, but is less clear about what instruments will be used to achieve it. In international relations, the dominant paradigm of the 20th century was the national or state security paradigm. Under this paradigm, the who or what to be secured is the state, or the set of quasi-permanent institutions like the military, the courts, and the bureaucracy, led by the government. The goal here is the maintenance of sovereignty, both internal and external. Internal sovereignty refers to the relationship between the state and the society, and the actual control by the state over its subjects and its territory. External sovereignty refers to autonomy from and legal and formal independence from other states or external actors, unless that autonomy is ceded in part through legitimate domestic political processes. For example, the member states of the European Union are still sovereign, even though they may have ceded some policy-making autonomy, especially on matters of economic, especially monetary policy, to the European Union. The focus is most directly on physical threats to that security, and thus state security is preoccupied with violent challenges, both foreign, i.e. other states or transnational actors like Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and domestic, i.e. armed rebellions, protest movements, and extremist groups using terror tactics. Now, environmental concerns are not entirely absent from the state security paradigm. National security strategy and doctrine has long been oriented around securing access to critical resources for sustaining the national economy, like adequate food supplies, cheap and reliable energy, and the raw materials like iron, steel, and aluminum, and increasingly rare earth metals and materials like cobalt and tungsten, necessary to project military force and fuel an industrialized economy. Germany's pursuit of Lebensraum, Imperial Japan's invasion of Manchuria, and both U.S.-led invasions of Iraq were motivated in part or in whole by desires to achieve food and or energy security, and access to materials for broader war efforts. Under this paradigm, the main instruments of policy, or the agencies and actors tasked with ensuring security, are the military and the intelligence services. By intelligence services, we mean those agencies, like the National Security Administration or the Central Intelligence Agency, tasked with identifying, tracking, and countering or neutralizing potential threats, often covertly. Now, even under a narrow conception of state security, other parts of government are often involved. For example, the U.S. Department of Energy and its semi-autonomous National Nuclear Security Administration oversee the research, development, testing, and acquisition programs that produce, maintain, and sustain the U.S. nuclear weapons arsenal. But in the main, the state security paradigm is 1. Focused on the security of the state and the maintenance of sovereignty, 2. Oriented around primarily physical threats and the capacity to project force, and 3. Reliant on the military and intelligence services as the primary policy actors. Now, if this definition of security sounds a bit too state-centric and reductive in terms of what constitutes a threat for your tastes, you're not alone. First, some of the darkest moments in the 20th century, including Stalin's purges, the Great Leap Forward, and the Holocaust, were perpetrated in the name of state security, with the citizens of those states being labeled as traitors and enemies of the state. The North Korean state is more secure than most Western pundits would like to give it credit for being, but state security certainly has come at the expense of rank-and-file North Korean citizens, millions of whom starved in the 1990s, in large part because the North Korean regime would not accept significant international assistance during a famine. And second, our current moment makes crystal clear the fact that in facing some of our gravest threats, from pandemic disease to climate change, the military and intelligence services are not our first nor our last line of defense. COVID is a threat to humanity, writ large. It's unclear what SEAL Team 6 or the 5th Fleet can do to address this fundamental threat. For this reason, the human security paradigm has been ascendant since the 1990s. Just as the end of the Cold War created space for thinking about environmental security, it also created space as well for thinking about a variety of problems, ranging from pandemic disease to poverty and hunger, that threaten human populations first and foremost, and affect national security in indirect but important ways. For instance, did you know that almost 4 times more people died of malaria last year than in all armed conflicts combined? Or that annually, almost 800,000 people around the world die due to hunger and malnourishment? Now, just to note, the human security paradigm is, like most ideas, not as new as the branding and its recent ascendance would suggest. Franklin Roosevelt's Four Freedoms speech in June of 1941 articulated the concept rather well in proposing 4 fundamental freedoms everyone in the world should enjoy: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Human rights scholars have been debating the focus on the first 2 relative to the last 2 in the 1948 Universal Declaration on Human Rights since, but at least as ideas, the concept of human security has historical precedence. Now, instead of positing the state as the entity to be secured, the entity to be secured is humanity, be it instantiated in a single individual, a household, or a community. The goal of the human security paradigm is not maintenance of sovereignty or protection against physical threat, but rather securing prospects for human development, the process of enlarging people's freedoms and opportunities and improving their well-being. Human well-being is incredibly multifaceted, but at base it includes concepts like access to nutrition and healthcare, access to clean water and sanitation, access to education, and freedom from physical threats, not just from enemies of the state, but from the state itself. Now, this is a very, very different prism through which to view the concept of security. Having established what is to be secured, the question then becomes, who will do the securing? Is the military the best tool for addressing a lack of educational opportunities, or for ensuring children have access to healthy meals? Is the intelligence community the best tool for anticipating and addressing threats to public health? In fact, in most places at most times, aren't most services provided by non-governmental actors? Where do you get food and medicine, for example? I get my food from a variety of markets and my medical care from Kaiser Permanente. The point here is that in real life, we rely on a variety of actors, from government to the private sector to charities, NGOs, religious communities, and self-help groups to meet our basic needs. For this reason, the human security paradigm takes not just a whole of government, but rather an almost all-encompassing whole of society view in terms of the relevant actors for addressing threats to human security. It's not just government, but civil society, the private sector, multilateral institutions and organizations, etc. Let's take an issue like food security, or ensuring that each individual has access to the nutrition necessary to lead a healthy and productive life. Sure, governments and international organizations like the World Food Program or Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations have a role to play in food security, from providing emergency food assistance to funding research to increase agricultural productivity and regulating the food supply to ensure quality and safety. But the primary actors, food producers, are almost all in the private sector, and the primary means of distribution, i.e. markets, are private as well. So, in comparing the national or state security and human security paradigms, we can summarize the key differences thusly. The state security paradigm is focused on the security of the state and the government, whereas the human security paradigm is focused on the security of individuals and communities. In the state security paradigm, the goal is the maintenance of both internal and external sovereignty, whereas in the human security paradigm, the goal is human development. In the state security paradigm, the primary threats are armed actors. In the human security paradigm, the threats are myriad and much, much more complex. Finally, in the state security paradigm, military and intelligence agencies are the focal actors. In the human security paradigm, the actors are much, much, much more diverse. Now, having sketched these paradigms in opposition to one another, it's important to note that there's broad recognition that state security and human security are inextricably intertwined. States are more secure when their populations are well-fed and have positive prospects to better their own lives. Humans are more secure when states have effective policy processes for addressing not just armed threats, but threats to things like public health. That is, human security and state security form a virtuous circle, reinforcing each other in important ways. It's no accident that the most stable, or least fragile, depending on how you want to think about it, states are also those that score highest on human development. So having sketched the human and state or national security paradigms in contrast to one another, it's important to note that they share a common emphasis on threat, or the idea that in our case, the environment poses a threat to human and state security that necessitates response. But not all IR theorists would share that view. The Copenhagen School of International Relations theory concerns itself largely with securitization, or the process by which a concept, issue, or actor is constructed, i.e. defined and conceptualized, as a threat, particularly one necessitating a militarized or security sector response that moves the issue beyond politics and encourages vast mobilization of resources and silencing of dissent. For more on securitization, I defer to Ole Weaver, professor of international relations at the University of Copenhagen, and one of the main reasons this school of thought is known as the Copenhagen School.
Securitization theory has taken a quite radical departure from the way we usually talk about security. Because when we talk about security, we tend to assume that there must be things out there that are security threats. And that's why we have the word security. And then we take this word security and we go around and see where it fits to those things. And we assume that the task of security analysts basically is to assess what are the biggest threats, how to deal with what, and then tell the policymakers, these are really serious things, you better do so and so on. The point of securitization theory is to say, well, it's actually the other way around. There are no natural things out there that are security threats and others that aren't. It's more that we as communities politically choose sometimes to deal with things in a particular way. We name certain things security problems, and when we do that, something happens to that issue and to our interaction around it. The point here is that when you say terrorism is a security threat, or you say climate change is a security threat, you're saying this is something existential that could be overriding normal issues. It's not a normal issue we can leave to normal politics and see maybe we deal with it, maybe we don't, maybe we do this, maybe we do that. No, it's a necessity. It's something that should not be allowed to happen. There's an existential threat here. If we allow it to happen, everything else will be lost. It will be too late. It will be gone. We have to deal with it, and because it's a necessity, it is outside the normal bounds of political rules, and we therefore can allow extraordinary measures like war, political violence, secrecy in the way we keep documents. We all know that for reasons of security, so-and-so is not public, and so on. We can have conscription, other measures we usually wouldn't do. We can violate international treaties, and so on. So the point here is that instead of assuming that issues out there run around somehow being or not being security issues, and we should try to run after them and put labels on them, it's rather we try now to understand what is that particular thing we are doing when we are labeling something a security issue, and more specifically, it's happening in a process where a securitizing actor says, this is an existential threat, therefore we have to act upon it, therefore it's legitimate to do something we otherwise couldn't do, and the relevant audience say, yeah, we accept that, thereby we grant you the right to use extraordinary measures.
Stepping outside the world of constructivist IR theory and back into our present purposes, the Copenhagen School is a critique of the traditional state and national security paradigm that actually provides intellectual ammunition for adopting a human security-centric, or at least human security-conscious approach. And as we will see as we begin discussing climate change as a U.S. national security issue, it has significant implications for which agencies and which policy tools are used to address the threat, and thus which agencies have adequate funding and are empowered to act in a particular policy space. So, in sum, the environmental security paradigm we will use throughout this course blends the perspectives of both state and human security paradigms. I do believe our changing environment poses both threats and opportunities, but I also accept the position forwarded by Frank Femia, co-founder of the DC-based Center for Climate Security and the Council on Strategic Risk, who boiled the issue down thusly. Securitizing climate change makes sense, but securitization is not the same as militarization. Acknowledging threats from our environment does not require or necessitate a militarized response per se. Up next, doom, gloom, and long-run fatalism square off against optimism and faith in the perfectibility of humanity, and do so for the 4th century running. It's doomers versus cornucopians.